Hello, everyone. So let's get started. My name is Mahesh Unnikrishnan, and I'm a PM on the Virtual Machine Manager team. And I'm joined here together with Neela, and he's a PM on the DPM team. Today, we're going to talk about protection and recovery using some new capabilities in Windows Server 2012 and System Center 2012 SP1. So this talk sort of focuses on two products, Virtual Machine Manager 2012 SP1 and DPM, or Data Protection Manager 2012 SP1. So I'll start off with some of the new capabilities in VMM 2012 SP1, and then Neela will take over and talk about some of the new capabilities in DPM. So at a high level, the capabilities that we are going to talk about in VMM today are some clustering and availability improvements. As you know, VMM already manages clusters, so you can actually deploy a VMM server on a failover cluster, and you can also use it to manage Hyper-V hosts that are actually part of a cluster. In Windows Server 2012, there are a lot of improvements to failover clustering, such as the addition of features such as preferred owners, possible owners, and availability sets. So we'll talk about how VMM leverages some of these capabilities and how you can use it to deploy virtual machines and make them resilient to outages, make them a lot more failure resilient. Now, regardless of how you deploy your infrastructure, failures happen, errors happen, and that's really where DPM comes in. There are a lot of investments we've done in DPM in this release, including support for live migration. As you know, with with Windows Server 2012, you can live migrate all over the place. You can live migrate between standalone hosts to clusters, between clusters, across clusters, and so on. So there are a lot of investments in DPM in order to support that. There's also a new feature called Cloud Backup to Azure. So we'll talk through these new features, and we'll talk about how these help you to essentially set up your workloads for better protection and resilience against failures. Just to get started, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of VMM 2012. Just a quick show of hands, how many of you have deployed VMM 2012, have played around with it? Oh, great. Okay. So I'll sort of talk through an overview of our investments in VMM 2012. And the important thing to note is that SP1 is an additive release. It sort of builds on top of the capabilities we've delivered in 2012. So there have been four major pillars in which we've invested in VMM 2012. The first one is infrastructure management. We focused on making the VMM server highly available, and we invested very heavily in PowerShell. So there are about 450 odd commandlets that you can use to automate every single aspect of VMM, right from deploying hosts, provisioning them using bare metal provisioning, right up to deploying virtual machines and services. The other major area of investment has been fabric management. Now, we define fabric as a mix of network or compute, networking, and storage. In terms of network management, we have a lot of new capabilities that have come in, and there are a few sessions here at TechEd 2012 which talk about the new features that we've added in SP1 as well. In terms of managing hypervisors, we manage Windows Server, Hyper-V, we manage Zen and VMware, and we've added some more new features, some more new capabilities in tune with what is shipped in Windows Server 2012. Now, a big part of what we'll be talking about today also relies on this feature called dynamic optimization. So this is a new capability that we introduced in VMM 2012, where if you deploy virtual machines to a cluster, VMM will monitor those virtual machines and make sure that it is rebalanced on the nodes of a cluster such that you get optimal utilization of your cluster. And we'll notice that some of these features which we introduced in VMM 2012 SP1 play very well with dynamic optimization. The third area of investment has been clouds. So VMM allows you to essentially create private clouds on top of your fabric infrastructure. This is a very good level of abstraction using which you can essentially assign capacity to your self-service users, and they can deploy virtual machines and services without knowing what is the underlying infrastructure on which the VM resides. We have capabilities and capacity which is assigned to a cloud, so self-service users can deploy their virtual machines to a cloud, and they're governed by the quota or the capacity that is available to them. The fourth area of investment has been services. So VMM has a model by which you can deploy up to three-tier applications and model them using service templates. We have support for app deployment, and we also have support for image-based servicing. So you can actually service the virtual machines using new VHDX images, VHD or VHDX images. So this is essentially a high-level overview of 2012 VMM. In SP1, we built on top of these capabilities, and there have been 4 major areas of focus. The first has been perf and scale. So as you know, on Server 2012, you have these massive 64-node clusters, and you can have up to 4,000 virtual machines on a single cluster. So in order for VMM to be able to manage that, we've invested very heavily in actually improving our perf and being able to scale and handle much more VMs. The other aspect of perf has been being able to actually refresh information from Hyper-V hosts, information about virtual machines, Hyper-V settings, and things like that. So we've invested very heavily in improving our perf, trying to make sure we get real-time updates from machines. The second big area of focus for us has been Windows Server 2012. As you know, it's a major release for Windows, and we have support for massive virtual machines with a lot of memory, a lot of CPU. We have extensive live migration enhancements where you can live migrate everywhere. We have new network virtualization features that allow you to essentially create virtualized network environments. In terms of storage management, Windows Server also adds support for SMIS along with storage spaces. So all of these are areas in which we have invested in VMM. But the focus of this talk, specifically my part of the talk, is going to be on clustering and high availability. There are a bunch of other investments as well in terms of partner enablement, where we've added the ability to extend the VMM UI. We've added support for more load balancer providers, added support for more storage providers using SMIS. And then there is a new category or a new area of investment called multi-tenancy. So here we've introduced this notion of a tenant administrator, where a tenant administrator can administer a bunch of SSU users or self-service users. And we've basically augmented our role-based access control model to add this notion of a tenant administrator. You'll also find service deployment improvements with the IIS app host and a bunch of other features. So I have a related slides section in this slide deck, and this lists the sessions which we cover these features in depth. So essentially, we are building on top of Windows Server 2012, and we use Server 2012 as the platform for the private cloud, specifically the Hyper-V and failover clustering features, and System Center as management. So just before we get started, it's an early preview. I'm literally working on a build that was code complete like last week. So let's get started with this. So the first big feature that we're going to talk about is the support for massive clusters and CSV v2. So in Windows Server 2012, you can now scale out your clusters and have up to 64 nodes in a cluster and scale up to about 4,000 VMs per cluster. This also means that you can have 1,024 virtual machines per node. So in VMM, we've invested in essentially supporting the scale. And this has meant changes to the way VMM refreshes information, the ability to handle a larger number of virtual machines per cluster node. And all of the existing workflows in VMM 2012 will continue to work with large 64-node clusters. This means you can actually create clusters with up to 64 nodes, keep adding and removing nodes, everything that you're currently used to doing in VMM 2012. The next big feature is CSV v2. So Windows Server 2012 ships with the next generation or the next evolution of CSV. And this is also used as the underlying platform for the file-based SMB storage. So the new file server has scale-out capabilities and is built on top of the CSV v2 platform. As Neela will talk to you, tell you a little later in the talk today, it also supports improved backup capabilities, and we've leveraged that heavily in DPM. CSV v2 offers direct I/O for most scenarios, so you don't need to go through the metadata owner node. And we leverage that heavily in VMM as well. So specifically in VMM 2012 SP1, we support CSV v2 and CSV FS. So those are the default settings. If you essentially create CSV or you enable CSV on a 2012 cluster, we'll basically use CSV v2 by default. We continue to support CSV v1 for Windows Server 2008 R2 based clusters. And we also have always had the ability to convert available storage in a cluster into CSV and to reclaim it back into available storage. So all of that continues with CSV v2. In addition to this, a major performance improvement is that when VMM is deploying virtual machines to a CSV-based cluster, we essentially now no longer need to go to the owner node. So you'll find that VM deployment on a failover cluster with CSV v2 is a lot faster. We've been able to eliminate a lot of bottlenecks, perf bottlenecks there. The next big feature we'll talk about is called preferred owners. Now this is the ability to essentially take a virtual machine and specify which nodes in a cluster are preferred owners for that VM. Now this is a failover clustering feature and it is supported in Virtual Machine Manager. So ideally you don't really need to configure a preferred owner, but for those admins or those scenarios where you want great granular control over exactly where a virtual machine resides, you have this ability to specify the preferred owner for that virtual machine. So this is essentially not done during VM creation or template creation because you've not yet selected the cluster on which the virtual machine resides. But once you deploy a virtual machine to a cluster, you can essentially right-click its properties, and I'll show you that in a demo. You can right-click its properties and assign a preferred owner to it. So the VMM placement engine will essentially remember the setting as long as the VM remains within a cluster. Because when you live migrate a VM out of a cluster, the preferred owner setting makes no sense anymore. But as long as the VM remains within that cluster, VMM remembers that setting, and the failover cluster will make every attempt to ensure that that VM resides on the preferred owner. Apart from that, you can add, edit, and remove preferred owners essentially using both the console and PowerShell. Now the VMM placement engine is aware of preferred owners. So when you essentially try to migrate a virtual machine and it has a preferred owner set, you'll essentially get a node which is the preferred owner as a higher rating than any other node in the cluster. This also means that dynamic optimization, the capability in VMM which rebalances the cluster, is also aware of preferred owner. So when you essentially have a VM that is not currently present on a preferred owner, VMM's dynamic optimization engine will kick in and move it off to a preferred owner at the next possible, next available opportunity. VMM has this notion of maintenance mode where you can essentially take a node and mark it for maintenance mode. So all the workloads on that node are drained, and then you can essentially patch the node or perform maintenance and bring it back into action. So the maintenance mode essentially ignores that setting. What that means is if you have a VM which is sitting on a node which you want to maintain and has that node as the preferred owner, VMM will still move the VM out so that you can continue to move the node into maintenance mode, complete maintenance, bring it back up, and at that point in time, dynamic optimization will move the VM back to that node. So it's not a hard block for maintenance mode so that you can go ahead and complete maintenance and then come back to that setting later. Preferred owners is also ignored in overcommit calculations. So VMM has this notion of overcommit calculation where it can essentially tell you how overcommitted your cluster is currently set up to be. But with preferred owners, it gets a lot more complicated to calculate that. So you will essentially get a warning there saying that it's not able to compute it correctly. Now the experience for setting that, and I'll actually show you this in a demo, is if you right-click a VM and go to the Settings tab from the Properties pane, you can see the preferred owners and the possible owners for the VM. It's a simple checkbox experience. You'll see all the nodes of the cluster listed there, and you simply have to enable which of the nodes you'd like to use as a preferred owner. So that brings us to the next big feature, which is possible owners. So this is a little different from preferred owners. This means that amongst all the nodes of a cluster, here is a set of nodes on which the VM can possibly go to. So there's no preference here, but you have, let's say, a 64-node cluster, but you want a VM to essentially remain within 4 to 8 nodes of a cluster. You would mark those as possible owners. Again, another new feature in Windows Server 2012. So VMM will essentially refresh the existing possible owner settings configured on a cluster. So if you were to use the failover cluster tools and configure possible or preferred owners, VMM will essentially refresh those settings and continue to honor them. VMM again allows you to add, edit, and remove these possible owner settings. And again, it will remember it as long as the VM stays within the cluster, because the notion of a preferred or possible owners essentially just makes sense within that cluster. If you move it off to the library, you move it off to another host, the setting does not make sense anymore. How does VMM's placement engine essentially deal with possible owners? So when you essentially try to place a VM and you select a node which is not a possible owner, you will get 0 stars in your ratings. So that's essentially, you'll also get a warning there which tells you that that node is not a possible owner. So the VMM placement engine will give you a hint and try to tell you that that VM is essentially you're trying to move the VM to a node that is not a possible owner. Dynamic optimization will again try to fix this up. So if you have a VM that is not on a possible owner, the next time dynamic optimization runs, VMM will essentially try to move that VM off of the node and bring it onto one of the possible nodes of the cluster. So VMs will not be migrated to a node that is not a possible owner. When you click a VM and select to live migrate it, the live migration wizard will essentially block you from moving it to a node that is not a possible owner of that VM. So essentially it is built into VMM and it will respect the possible and preferred owner setting and allow you to essentially deal with it seamlessly on a cluster. Again, maintenance mode ignores this warning in the interest of actually letting you put that node into maintenance mode and bring it back up. The experience for configuring this is exactly the same. You'll notice that all the nodes in the cluster will automatically show up and all of them will be checked by default, which means if you actually deploy a VM to a cluster, all nodes in the cluster are possible owners of that VM. You can actually choose to deselect whichever you do not want to be a possible owners. So it's a lot simpler than you having to actually go and select each individual node. Specifically for a 64-node cluster, it would be really painful to click that 64 times. So what we do is we default to allowing a VM to essentially have every single node in a cluster as a possible owner, and then you can unselect the ones that you do not want as a possible owner. The next big feature essentially in Windows Server 2012 is VM priority. And this is a way for you to express the priority or the importance of a VM on that failover cluster. And you essentially have high, medium, low kind of settings. The goal of the priority setting essentially is to make sure that the most important VMs, that is VMs marked high priority, are always started up first. So when a cluster comes back up, you essentially ensure that only the high priority VMs are started up first. And then if resources are available, you start up the medium and the low priority VMs. It also ensures that the most important VMs are running at any time. So if you run low on resources, the failover cluster essentially preempts low priority VMs. That means it'll shut them down and try to make room or make resources for your high importance or high priority VMs. So this is essentially ideal if you want to use infrastructure services on that cluster. So if you want to make sure your DCs are always running, if you have a bunch of extremely critical back-end infrastructural services, you can mark those virtual machines as high priority. And then the cluster, the failover clustering infrastructure will ensure that those VMs are always running. So VMM 2012 supports VM priority natively. So what that means is that you can essentially refresh the VM priority settings. If you were to go to the failover cluster and configure those, VMM is going to essentially refresh those in and then respect those VM priority settings. VMM will essentially remember that setting even if you move the VM across clusters. So if you had a VM which was sitting on cluster A and now you live migrate it out to cluster B, VMM will remember that that VM was high priority. So you don't have to go back and fix it up once you do a live migration. That setting essentially goes along with the VM and it persists. You can set this priority setting during VM creation and also in a VM template. So if you create a template for a domain controller, for instance, and you mark that as high priority, any VM that you stamp out of that template will automatically be marked as a high priority VM. So the setting is essentially again the same. You right click a VM. In the availability section you have a bunch of checkboxes and you can select whether it's a high, medium or low priority VM. So let's try to do a quick demo here. Okay, so I'm going to click on the VMs and services section or the workspace in VMM. I select my VM here, my VM01, and I'm right clicking and selecting the properties for that VM. Okay, so we'll wait for the settings to be pulled down. You'll notice that it's a 2008 R2 VM. And let me try to zoom in here. So this is where you'd select the preferred owners for that VM. You'll notice that this is a 2-node cluster, and both the nodes of the cluster essentially show up. If you were to essentially mark, let's say, the node 1 as a preferred owner, it's as simple as setting that checkbox there. And then that setting is essentially propagated down to the cluster, and that node becomes the preferred owner for the VM. Similarly, you can see the possible owner settings. This is again a list of all the nodes in the cluster, and all of them are automatically checked so that it's much easier for you. So let's say I want to make sure that the VM does not go to node 2. All I have to do is unselect N2. And essentially, if you have 64 nodes in the cluster, all of them will show up there, and you can select which ones you don't want as a possible owner. Right. So the next thing is, we'll quickly show you the infrastructure here we have. We have a 2-node cluster and 2 standalone nodes. And we are essentially going to walk through the, let me actually show you VM priorities before we go back to the slide deck. So again, VM priorities is very similar. You right-click properties for the VM. In the hardware configuration section, if you scroll down to availability, this is how you essentially mark a virtual machine to be highly available. So here I have a virtual machine which is highly available. And VM priority is a simple setting here. So I have marked this virtual machine to be high priority. You have the option of marking them high, medium, low, or no auto start. So if it's marked no auto start, the failover cluster will not automatically try to start that virtual machine. Let me quickly switch over to the deck, and we'll talk about an interesting concept called VMM availability sets. And then after that, I'll show you a demo of how availability sets works with Virtual Machine Manager. So VMM availability sets are essentially a way in which you can configure virtual machines to have anti-affinity. What that means is if you take a bunch of virtual machines and configure them to have anti-affinity, VMM will try to place those virtual machines on different hosts and try to ensure that they are not together. The advantage of that is if the host were to go down, you have other instances of the VM which are on different hosts, and therefore you get greater resilience to failures. So on Windows Server 2008 R2 and Windows Server 2012 failover clusters, there is a feature called anti-affinity class names. I'm not sure everybody's aware of that, but this is a feature that we have shipped for 2 releases. And what that means is if you actually create an anti-affinity class for virtual machines on a cluster, the cluster will try to make sure that those virtual machines are placed differently, so that if one of the nodes of the cluster were to go down, it only takes down one of those virtual machines. There's another instance somewhere else. So VMM is essentially, in 2012 SP1, we have built a feature called availability sets that is built on top of the cluster anti-affinity. But we actually took it one step forward. We built the feature such that it works for standalone hosts, VMware hosts, Xen server hosts, as well as clustered Hyper-V hosts. So what happens is that you essentially, let's take an example here. Let's say I have an availability set called domain controllers, and I have a few instances of my domain controllers. It simply means that VMM will ensure that these virtual machines are placed on different hosts, and so that they're resilient to failures. The way this works is that the VMM placement engine is aware of availability sets. So when you try to create a new virtual machine, it's going to check to see what availability set it is part of. And before placing it to a host, it's going to check to see if there's another virtual machine with that same availability set available on that host. If it is, then that host gets 0 ratings and it will not try to place it on that host. And because we do it in the VMM placement engine, therefore this feature can actually work for standalone, clustered, non-clustered Hyper-V hosts. It can work for Xen server, and it can also work for VMware hosts. So in case of VMM 2012 SP1, what we do with availability sets is we actually go down to the underlying cluster and we create these anti-affinity class names automatically. So you do not need to actually go to a cluster and create these anti-affinity class names. If you were to deploy a VM to the cluster, VMM will automatically create those anti-affinity class names. Similarly, if you were to create any anti-affinity class names from the cluster, VMM is going to refresh those in and is going to begin to honor those settings. Again, this setting is remembered across migrations. So you could move a virtual machine from host to another cluster, between the nodes of the cluster, to the library, but VMM is going to always remember that setting. It's going to remember the availability set that you configured for that virtual machine. We actually took this one step further. we try to make it a much more simpler experience for a self-service user to actually configure this. The self-service user typically deals in terms of clouds. He does not understand the underlying host on which the virtual machine resides. So what we've done is we've actually taken this feature forward and provided a single checkbox experience for a self-service user. So when a SSU user is essentially creating a service, they simply have a single checkbox by which they can say, create an availability set for it. And then VMM will automatically move instances of that service to different hosts. So let me actually give you a quick demo of that. So I'm going to go to the library view in VMM, and here I have a bunch of service templates. A service template is really just a way to model your service, and you can create a service with multiple tiers, model it using this template. So I'm going to actually right-click my non-HA service template. So this is a service template which creates a service where the virtual machines are not highly available. This is just to demonstrate to you that the feature works even for standalone hosts. It works for VMware hosts, works for Xen hosts as well. So let's actually open this in the VMM Service Designer. So this is the VMM Service Template Designer, and you'll notice that what we're actually going to load up is a two-tier service. So I have a very simple two-tier service where I have a web tier and a SQL tier. Let's make some room here. Great. So maybe I should just zoom in a little bit. So you'll notice that my service has two tiers. There's a web tier and a SQL tier. The web tier essentially has 4 initial instances and has a min of 1 and a max of 5, which means that when this web tier is scaled up, it can go up to 5 instances. The default or the initial is 4 instances, and you can scale it down all the way down to 1 instance. Similarly, you'll notice on the SQL tier, the initial setup is for 2 instances. You can scale it all the way up to 5 instances and scale it down to 1 instance. If we were to actually click the tier properties, let me zoom out. Actually, let me show you the availability sets. You'll notice that the experience we have is a simple checkbox, create an availability set for this tier. So that's all a self-service user has to do. When they model a VMM service using multiple tiers, for each tier they simply have to mark this availability set checkbox, and that's all there is to it. So let me quickly show you how to deploy the service and show you how the VMM engine essentially behaves. So I've now got this two-tier service, and I've actually configured an availability set for my web tier. So when you click on Configure Deployment, you can actually give the service a name. Let me actually call it Service 2. Right? Can you see that? So I've marked it Service 2 for now. When I hit OK, the VMM placement engine is going to try and find out, it's going to try and find out the right set of hosts on which that service can be placed. So you'll notice in the background, it is trying to find out the right set of hosts for each tier in that service. Let's quickly take a look at what it has found for us. So here you'll notice that the web tier, which had an initial instance count of 4, VMM is going to try and deploy 4 virtual machines for that. Similarly, for the SQL tier, it's got 2 virtual machines. And the placement ratings are going to try and make sure that the VMs are placed on 2 different hosts. So for instance, the SQL tier is placed on host 104, Hyper-V host 104, and the second instance is on Hyper-V host 105. So what VMM has tried to do is essentially automatically created an availability set and moved those virtual machines onto 2 different hosts. So if one of the hosts were to go down, you still have a surviving VM instance on the other host, and therefore you get better resiliency to failures. Similarly, if you look at the web tier, essentially it has striped it across all 4 hosts. So it's put one instance on one node of a cluster, another instance on the second node of a cluster, and then it has used a bunch of standalone machines. So you'll notice that the web tier instances have been striped across 4 different hosts, such that none of the virtual machines are together. So this is a way in which your self-service user can simply select a single checkbox and say make it an availability set. They do not need to understand what host the VM is going on, and they simply go ahead and deploy it. So let's actually quickly move over to the deck. So you can essentially manage availability sets, and availability sets are simply tags. So you can create your own tag, you can create your own availability set and assign it to a virtual machine. It's a very, very simple operation. I have a few screens here, and essentially it's just a matter of assigning the availability set to a virtual machine. Placement and dynamic optimization. Essentially, when you try to place a VM on a host which already has another VM with the same availability set, placement will warn you and try to prevent you from doing that. Again, dynamic optimization will kick in and it will try to fix instances where you've gone ahead and deployed it on the same host. I think I can skip through these. We've actually gone through all of these. Just a few quick management notes before I hand it over to Neela. There's a new feature in Windows Server 2012 called Cluster Aware Update. And that's really a way in which you can update a cluster in an orchestrated manner. So for Hyper-V clusters, our recommendation is really to use VMM because VMM has a lot of mature functionality around actually working with WSUS and updating your Hyper-V clusters. Placement and DO will automatically load balance virtual machines. So if you're actually updating a cluster, VMM will do it in an orchestrated manner where it brings down nodes, updates those nodes, moves all the virtual machines off to another node, and performs this one by one for every node in the cluster, and then completes the update operation. However, VMM does not update clusters which are not Hyper-V clusters. So if you have a file server cluster or a SQL Server cluster or something else, you're better off using the cluster aware update infrastructure in Windows Server 2012. A quick note about application health monitoring. The failover cluster in Windows Server 2012 also monitors health of your applications. So essentially, if your app plays along well with that infrastructure, the failover cluster will understand when the app failed, and essentially it'll show you warnings and errors which tell you that there are failures encountered by that app. Now, this is targeted typically at customers who do not deploy Operations Manager. If you have Operations Manager, most applications are already, they have their management packs, and so you can use Ops Manager there. Great. So that's all I had. Neela is going to take over from here and talk to you about some of the new capabilities we've added in DPM, and also walk you through Cloud Backup Service. So over to you, Neela.
Thank you, Mahesh. Are you able to hear me? You're able to hear me. Okay, good. So Mahesh talked about in your data center, how do you optimally manage your data, manage your clouds, your applications, and be ready for any dynamic needs in your data center. Now, another important aspect of your data center is to back it up and be ready for any disaster situations. That's where the DPM comes into the picture here. And now I'm going to talk about the DPM product. Just quick to know how many of you are using the data protection manager so far. Excellent, excellent. Thank you. So as you know, data protection manager is an enterprise level backup product, and it is for best backup solutions for Microsoft applications. And we do protect server applications like Exchange, SQL, SharePoint, Hyper-V, but also we protect the clients as well. We do have the efficient backup there as well. We do as frequent as 15 minutes for backups, and we can do a short-term protection to the disk. That means that it's 2 weeks, a 2-week protection or a 1-month protection. We can do that, and we can also protect a long-term tape for your compliance requirements. And a lot of you move the tapes outside so that you can bring it back if need be, and for all these needs you have the long-term protection tape. Another important one, the way you do is that what we call is a DR, a DPM for disaster recovery. Here the data protection manager you deploy another DPM server, which is called secondary DPM server, in your premise or in your main office, wherever, and then let it back up the data from the primary data center, the primary data DPM server, and that is your disaster recovery solution. If something goes bad, everything on the other side, you can recover from the DPM server. Now, we are going to talk about what is coming in as part of DPM 2012 SP1. We have 3 major pillars that we are making investments on. First and foremost important pillar we have is that Windows Server 2012. As you have seen in the keynote and the rest of the presentations, Windows Server 2012 made significant investments in the Hyper-V private cloud deployments and its efficiencies, but also various improvements have been made in the file system, storage, everywhere. And DPM is going to enable enable backup solutions for these Windows features as well. The next one we have here is DPM backup to cloud. So far, one of the most popular asks that we have been hearing is that, hey, you protect to the disk, you protect to the tape, but I don't want to manage these tapes. Is there any other way for me to transfer the data? Here is the solution. You can take the data, you can protect from the production server to the DPM, and then take that data to the cloud. This is hot off the press. We are just building. I'm going to show you a demo. No one has seen this yet, so this is the hot off the press one. Another important thing that we are doing here is the scale improvements, performance and the scale improvements. We have made complete investment on the Hyper-V, where your private cloud VM backup will become efficient no matter how many kinds of deployments you have. You put it on a standalone, you put it on a cluster, CSV cluster that Mahesh just now talked about. You put it on a Hyper-V over SMB, which is a brand new feature in the Windows 2012, where you keep your process and computes aside and storage in one place, and we can protect that efficiently as well. I'm going to show you a demo on that as well. Also, one of the important things that we observed in your environments is that 80% of the churning on a VM is happening because of the page file. Now, we are intelligent enough to detect a page file with your settings, and then we can exclude that backup, which means that without doing anything other than just keeping the page file aside, you will get 80% of the backup storage savings, not only on the network, but also on the DPM storage side as well. Now, last but not least, that Mahesh was talking about, 64-node clusters. Windows 2012 can be increased, and we are able to protect the 64-node clusters using multiple DPM servers. So that is another significant improvement that we are making. And DPM 2012 was protecting 16-node cluster with 400 VMs. And we have been calculating with a 50 GB as average VM size. But what we heard from you is that the VM size has going up. Now it's averaging about 90 to 100 GB. And we will be able to protect 16-node cluster with 800 VMs, double the capacity, plus 100 GB. So we are going significantly improvement on the DPM server side. Now, let's talk about this one. Hyper-V CSV. Hyper-V CSV 2.0, Mahesh briefly touched upon the topic that, CSV 2.0 made significant improvements and enhancements in there. Not only it allows the parallel backups, it does allow it does take away the bottlenecks of one node parallel, non-owner node, and it does support live migration as it done in the CSV 1.0. DPM has implemented a technology called expressful technology, where it tracks all the changes as they happen, and at the time of backup, we will just go ahead and back up the whole VM, not the whole, whatever things changed on the VM efficiently. And this brings up 80 to 90% of the savings on IOPS and the processing that we consume in the previous 2012 and Windows 8 R2, and we are very efficient on that as well. Yes, we can do the parallel backups now. So far, we have been asking customers to do the serial backups. You don't need to do that anymore. You can run the parallel backups as you have done with other data sources. Also, live migration. You are moving the VM based on your requirements of process requirements, load balancing. We can do an efficient backup. We have been doing that in the past. We will continue to do that as well. Okay. Now, Windows 2012 has implemented a new feature called a Hyper-V over SMB, which means that you have a Hyper-V node. So far, you have a local mount, be it a SAN connection, be it a local SATA drive, whatever. Now, that storage can be residing on a remote file server, which is SMB-v3, which is part of Windows 2012 feature, and Hyper-V can store its data on that. And DPM is able to do efficient backup of that as well. We extended our expressful technology to this one also, which means that we just track the changes when there is a backup time. We'll just back up those changes. We know what needs to be changed there. Another important aspect is that you have a Hyper-V now. With the Hyper-V so far, you have either standalone or cluster. Now with the SMB, you have 4 combinations. Your SMB can be standalone SMB, or you have a scale-out SMB cluster. We can do that, all 4 combinations efficiently as well. You can have Hyper-V standalone, cluster, standalone. All these combinations, we do efficient backups there as well. Oh, another important thing. If you have, this brings up a completely a new live migration capabilities where you have a standalone Hyper-V, another standalone Hyper-V. You have your storage on the remote SMB share, and you have the VM, you wanted to move that VM from the host one to another host. We will be able to detect that and be able to efficiently back up on that as well. I am going to show you a demo how it works. Another important aspect that Windows 2012 has done is that to enable the live migration of VMs from anywhere to anywhere, live migration without limits. That is the motivation, that is the statement that Windows 2012 coming up with. So it is within a cluster, cluster to cluster, standalone to cluster, all combinations. DPM can automatically detect it and do the protection without any intervention from you as a DPM admin or a Fabric admin as a VMM admin. No changes required, no intervention required. I'll show you a demo on that as well. Now, another very popular ask, Windows 2012 has enabled the dedupe file systems, dedupe on the file systems, which means that you have a volume, you have a E colon or F colon, you enable the dedupe on them, you get the storage savings. What does that mean for the backup? We do efficient backup there. If you have 100 GB of data and you have dedupe has done it 60 GB, we will copy 60 GB over the wire and we will store it as 60 GB on the DPM side. That's the efficiency we are bringing on both on the wire as well as on the storage that we consume. Now we'll just quickly shift to the demo. I have a demo machines here. Let me bring it up here. Okay. Okay. I have. First, let's go to my DPM machine. I have 5 protection groups here, 6 protection groups. This is a Hyper-V over CSV. I have a VM that is protected, that is running right now on a cluster. I have a standalone that is stored its Hyper-V on a remote SMB share. Remember I talked about 2 standalones having the same remote SMB share? That's what here it is. And then I have another SMB here, Hyper-V standalone. There is another one here, one VM running on it. I have 2 file system protections that I have, and I will walk over that dedupe and non-dedupe as well. First, let's go and look at how the CSV protection works here. I will just start the backup on the CSV here. This machine is running out of India, so I'm remoting, so there will be a slight delay in the GUI or my clicks here. Please pardon me on that. Okay, so that's all. We are creating the protection backup point. Now let's go and look at, while this is going on, let's go and look at the VMM. Mahesh talked about how to manage and how to manage your VMs, how do you protect it, how do you deploy a cluster, and this is the VMM that I have in my environment here. I have a 2-node cluster. This is the cluster that we have seen on the DPM machine. I have 2-node cluster here that has a CSV1. Remember, we were protecting CSV1 that I just started the backup with. I have a standalone machine that has 2 VMs running here, and I have another standalone machine that has nothing running on here. I would like to quickly point out what is here, right? I'm going to go to the properties of this VM. I'm clicking on the properties here. It's coming up, and then we will go to the settings. Sorry, custom properties. Oh, my bad, hold on. Hardware configuration, sorry. You see this here? The Hyper-V is storing this VM on a remote SMB share, which is called NSK-W8 SMBFS file system on SMB share. So this VM is residing on a remote SMB share. This is a brand new feature that came in as part of Windows 2012. Okay. Now the same thing here too. I am storing this VM also on the same SMB share here. It's on the SMB share and it has its own directory. So these VMs are residing on the SMB share now, and I would like to show you a demo of, let's say this standalone 6 machine is becoming overloaded, and you want to migrate this VM to another Hyper-V host so that process compute will be load balanced here. And I'm going to do it as what the Fabric admin would have done. I'm migrating the virtual machine here. VMM brought in a cool new feature where it looks at your current VM and see what matches in your cloud, what matches in your with these properties, and show some star rating here. Right now it is saying that my current host is 6. The similar matching that has is the 7, HVSA 7, Hyper-V standalone 7. And I'm going to select that. Let me bring it up a little bit and move up here. And then I'm saying here. Remember, both the standalone 6 and standalone 7 are using the same remote assembly share. So VMM is intelligent enough saying that, hey, your storage is in a common location, so I don't need to migrate the storage. I'm going to migrate only the process and compute. So that's what it's saying. I'm moving your machine from 6 to 7, and I'm moving this VM1, right? That's it. And it's going to complete the VM migration. It's going to be faster because there is no storage migration here. It is just the process and compute. And that's the beauty you get with even if it's a standalone machine here, right? Now let's go and check. Let's wait for this one to be completed. And it's almost done with this one. Okay, so while this is coming up, let's go back to our DPM machine here. Remember, we enabled the CSV. We scheduled a job for CSV. You see that? It took 1 minute 11 seconds to complete the backup. That's the efficiency. So far, it used to take half an hour, depending on your size of the machine. But now it is depending on how much of your VM is changed. 1 minute. That's the efficiency we brought in. Let's go back and check where is this VMM, how is that doing here? It's still doing its job. Okay. While that's going on, I'd like you to point to a specific thing here. Let's go back to our protection tab. Here is where we configure our protections. Now I have, I'm going to go to the top and look at my dedupe. I have a single machine. I have 2 drives here. I have E drive and D drive, and I'm protecting both the drives. Both the drives have exactly the same content, no changes at all. Yes, I put it as a VHDs, VMs, and all those things in there to show you the storage savings that you get with it. Now, the D drive has the dedupe enabled, whereas E drive do not have the dedupe enabled. Let's look at the consumption that it's doing. For a D drive, DPM is created a volume of 11.13 GB, and it consumed 5.23 GB of space. Now let's go and look at what is doing with the E drive. The same content, exactly the same content, it is taking 34.81 GB and it is taking 28.5 GB of space. Exactly the same content, no changes at all. What is the difference? The D drive has the dedupe enabled, E drive does not have it. That is the efficiency we are bringing in here. Now let's go back and check. Let's go back and check VMM. Yep, it completed its demo. Now we see this. This VM has moved to standalone 7. Now let's go and start the backup on this VM1 and see what happens here. I'm going back here, and we were doing the backup of VM1. So here is the VM that we just moved. So far, it is thinking that it is in 6. Remember, we just migrated. If our Fabric admin wanted to move it to somewhere else, he migrated to 7. I'm going to create a recovery point here. It's as usual, right? You just create a backup point. I'm triggering it manually, but DPM does, based on your schedules, it will automatically trigger it. Now, let's go back to our monitoring. I triggered the job here. Now, you see this one. The job is progressing, right? Oh yeah, it's already done. It's way ahead of here. So the VM was in 6. DPM detected that the VM was in 6, and it automatically failed the job, started a new job on the Hyper-V 7. How did we do it? DPM went and talked to the VMM and say, hey, my VM was somewhere here. It's missing. What happened to it? And then VMM will tell us, okay, go and talk to the Hyper-V 7. And that's what we are doing. I did not do anything from the backup perspective. Fabric admin took a decision of moving the VM. No problem. We will do the backup. So backup triggered, and that is done here. And it is going to take few minutes because, again, it's an expressful. Remember, the Hyper-V standalone. I have a remote SMB store, common storage. There is no storage changes. So DPM is intelligent enough, and it will take the backup of that VM and in expressful fashion. Let's wait for it to complete, then we can come back here. So what did we talk about? We'll come back and see how will it complete. Oh, yeah, it's completed. Good. So what did I do here? I did from a standalone to standalone machine, I did a live migration. My backup completed in a minute. Who else in the world can do this backup job here with that efficiency? No one else in the world can do this. That's DPM here, guys. Okay, let's go back to our slides here. Okay, so what did we do here? We did the CSV. We have seen the efficient protection of CSV. We have seen the remote SMB where Hyper-V VM is there, and we did the backup. And even after the migration, we did efficient backup as well. We have the dedupe, and we did efficient backup on dedupe as well. We have the dedupe protection as well. Now, oh, sorry, I'm here. Now, DPM backup to cloud. One of the important, another pillar that we are implementing is the DPM backup to cloud. And basically, it means that you have your data on the production server, be it a VM, be it a SQL, be it a file system, it doesn't matter. You protected it to the DPM. Now you want to take it to the cloud for whatever the reasons. You don't want to mess up with your tapes and worry about all these tape enhancements and everything. We can do the, DPM can do that now. I'm going to show you a demo. So what is the value prop? What exactly are we doing here? You have all these things. We just showed you the slide here. We are just introducing another option for you. Either you want to put it in your disaster recovery site, another site, or you move it to the cloud. You don't need to manage another DPM server here. That's what we are trying to do here. Now I'm going to talk about how to do this one. And yes, this is going to be a heart of the press, and this is just coming off. So please bear with me if there are any issues with the CTP2 bits we have here. Okay, let me see if I can get in there. Okay, so I have another DPM server because this is heart of the press. It's not well integrated into the bits that you already have seen in the CTP2 bits on the website, right? So I have this here. So let's talk about it. In a DPM, generally you all are aware of this, right? In a DPM, first thing you do is that you add a storage to your DPM server. And cloud is also same thing for us. Let's go and look at what did we do in the DPM. If I can find out a cursor here. Yes, okay. Now I'm running the management here, tab here. You are all familiar that you have a disk, you have a tape, you have an agent. Now we have introduced another tab called online. See this here? So no changes. It's well integrated here. It's right here. You manage your agents, you manage your disk, you are managing now your online. What do we do here online? You go and register an online service that we are going to present to you. It's called online backup service. That is going to come as part of the SP1 release. You register here and give the credentials. You give what kind of passphrase you want to use for encrypting your data. Another question we keep getting is that, hey, I give you the data, you put it in a cloud. What if someone takes a look at it? It's encrypted. We don't have the key. You miss the key, you have the key, you keep it, and you do it. And when you want to recover it, go to the DPM and give the key, then only it can come out. So that data is encrypted right there. The next process in any step is that protection. You have to create a protection group for your whatever you want to protect it as. I'm going to do a new protection here. It's coming up. I'm going to protect a file server, simple file server here. So you know this one, you know the drill, right? It's a server. I have only one server. Actually, this is the server that I'm running on. I'm going to expand this one and select my drive that I want to protect and protect that particular volume and see how do I do that. How do I configure my regular backup to disk and backup to my cloud as well. Okay, I clicked on that. Okay, so I am going to expand this one here, F drive, and I have a tech demo folder here. I am just going to start this protection. You see this one? You are familiar with the disk. You are familiar with your tape. Now you got an online backup here. That's simple. You are creating a protection group. It's well integrated within your workflows. No changes, no new things you have to worry about. Do I need to go here, get this one, get this one? No. You register your storage as an online storage. You have a tab here, and you can select this one. Now I'm going to I'm specifying that I want to do a short-term protection to disk. I want to do an online protection here. Now, these are all usual parameters. You want how frequently you want to back up, how long you want to retain the backups, and what times you want to do it. This is for the disk. Here you go, and it's saying that this is the disk I'm using, and this is the space I need. I'm going to take this. Is that okay? Or if you want me to change somewhere else. Now the next one is, it's talking about you wanted to, this is a how should we do a replica of the DPM server and everything, all the parameters. And it is another parameter, should I do a consistency check automatically if my backup becomes inconsistent for whatever reason, there is no connection, something broken there. Now the next one. See, you selected for online backup. You have it right here. No changes. You don't need to go anywhere. It's well integrated, well within the same workflow. I'm selecting here saying that I want to back up whole of my backup here. What if you have 1 GB files here and you are only worried about this 10 MB file? We can do that here. We can protect it. Now let's go here. You can specify. Remember, you have the same workflow that we did for the disk. It's exactly the same workflow. It's just that the target is another storage, online backup cloud storage. That's it. I'm creating a protection group here. That's all. What did we just do here? We registered an online service, online backup, well within the DPM. You did not leave the DPM. You are creating a protection group, and you selected your disk. Now you selected online also. Now you can do everything in one place, and the protection group is created here. While the backup is going on, just for the sake of time here, I created another group that I already created here, and I'm going to show you how does the recovery works. You see this one, this is another folder that I created, and I selected for online backup also. So let's go and look at the recovery, how it works. Are you observing a new one here? It used to be a disk, and now it has another point of recovery point called online. It's as simple as that. Everywhere, wherever you have a disk, wherever you have a tape, you have online. That's it. It's well integrated within the system. Now I want to recover the data for whatever reason. I want to recover the data from the online. Now I am recovering it from online. There you go. I am recovering here. Clicking here, and then I'm saying, it's a regular workflow again. Even though the data is coming out from online, it is same workflow that you have been all familiar with. I'm recovering to the original location and do that. That's simple. Everything is same, no change. Yes. Yes, we are creating Windows Azure service, a separate service called online backup service. You register for that service, and that storage is there, and we manage the storage and everything. You pay to that service. That's it. No, at this point, it's only Azure. We have to well integrate with our workflow and everything, so that's where we leverage on that. Okay, so that recovery is going on, and it's the same workflow that you are already familiar with. So let's go back to our slide. Where are we on that now? Now, what did we see? We saw a well integrated end-to-end solution where you can protect your data to DPM and then automatically take it to the cloud. And that is the flow. We have seen how do you register for a service, how do you create a protection group, how do you do a recovery, how do you monitor. Everything is exactly the same. You don't need to go through any new learning curve here. Now we looked at the demo. Okay. Hello. Yep. Okay. One of the most popular asks that we keep getting is, can the US government take this data because of Patriotic Act? Answer is no. What happens if the cloud gets hacked? What happens if the cloud is, someone misuses their data? Can Steve Ballmer get the data because he's the CEO? Answer is no. Your data is safe. Remember, when you are registering, you are providing a password key that is only known to you. Unless that password key is provided, nobody can recover the data. And Microsoft do not keep that data with us. You have to give that data. Let's say you lose the data, you lost your password key. Microsoft cannot recover it. It's the key management. We are not in there. It's completely encrypted, and we have the data. Even if someone gets the data, someone hacks it and takes the data, it's nothing there. It's an encrypted data, right? Yes. Another important task is, hey, I am in Europe and I cannot take my data to America because of my compliance requirements. Answer is yes. You can choose where you want to keep the data and what are our boundary parameters that you want to keep it on. Another biggest worry everyone has is that, hey, I have a WAN, and WAN is generally small, thin pipeline. What are the optimizations we are doing? We are doing the compression, and you can do the network throttling also. Like, for example, you want to keep this as a low priority of moving the data to cloud in the daytime. On the evening, you want to move it efficiently. You can do the throttling. You can specify that, and you can do all of these things under under this service. Everything is well integrated, well managed there. Sorry? No. There are various technical complexities that comes into the picture, not on the V1. But we do understand that you want to have the dedupe and a lot of storage savings. We understand that, but at this point, no. We are going on there. Any other questions we have? Yes. My understanding is the standard encryption, but I can take an action item and get back to you on that. 256-bit encryption, but I can get back to you on that. Any other questions? Yes. It is completely configurable, but at the same time, depending on the amount of data that you are trying to transfer, you will expect the bigger pipe or smaller pipe. So it's completely depending on what data you want to transfer, how do you want to transfer.
Because for one backups, you have some standards in your guides, so I was wondering if you would be releasing some guidelines for cloud backups.
Yes, we are working on that. We are working on that, the actual calculators that will help you in guiding that. Yes, we are working on that. Any other questions? Thank you, guys. That's it.
Any VMM questions? I'd be happy to take those as well. Great. All right. Thank you so much. You've been a great crowd.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks.